Right. Hopefully this link will work.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Hopefully the link will work. I think the law of all live streams. Oh no, something's making me hear myself. Okay, here we go. Fixed. I think every stream by law has to start with like an awkward thing about putting out links and fumbling around a little bit.
Some sort of technical problem. There's always going to be one.
Yeah. So hello, everybody. Welcome to January's Subscriber Appreciation Day for those who are new to the channel. And judging how January has been, there's probably a lot of you. Subscriber Appreciation Day is a once-a-month live stream I do on the last Sunday of the month, typically, depending on, schedules and stuff, where I grab a cool creator or someone who's really awesome, and we come in and we talk with them and talk to the audience. And I think today we have at least the largest creator subscriber-wise to ever come on the show, but also somebody who I've been super interested in their content for a long time, ever since somebody in the comments told me I looked like them and I checked out the channel. So I want you all to give a very nice warm welcome to Isaac Arthur.
It's glad to be here, Tristan.
And I just want to ask you, I guess, for the people who haven't heard of you, could you just outline what you do with Science and Futurism with Isaac Arthur is the name of the channel?
Well, over at SFIA, we mostly try to look at futuristic concepts, usually more than next generation, a century or two ahead at least, and try to look at some of the concepts there. We spend a lot of time on science fiction concepts and try to deconstruct them or see if they actually make sense after all. And mostly we just try to look at these concepts and see inside known science as opposed to science fiction. How plausible are these? Are these viable? And if not, what are the alternatives?
Yeah, and you've talked through, you have a physics background, and you talk through like what is in the realm of the physically possible, what's in the realm of the doable, and sometimes just being like just pushing physics to its absolute limit.
And it's interesting is we often find that many of the fantastic ideas that you see in sci-fi that are not likely to be possible turn out to be actually a little bit small and tiny compared to some things that physics tells us we can do if we're willing to throw enough manpower at it. It's things inside the realms of physics that are possible if, again, you've got virtually unlimited manpower. So, more robots.
Yeah, I feel like from a lot of the things I've seen that have been talked about, especially you've talked a lot about superstructures. I imagine that's the construction of the future, right? So,
yeah, megastructures we tend to think are mostly, again, anything very, very large. Technically, our freeway system would count as a megastructure. I think the loose rule is anything bigger than 1,000 kilometers or miles across. And it's a bit arbitrary, of course, but the general notion would be anything that pretty much classifies almost as its own planet or something so large that could qualify as a small moon.
Yeah, and I think there were some people who were talking about, I think you mentioned in your video on ring worlds that like when the construction equipment requires cannibalizing two of our inner solar system planets, then yeah, that's like when you start getting into the super and superstructure.
Sure, a lot of those things, and again, the ring world, it's got 1 million times the surface area of Earth. That's from Larry Niven's Ring World book from the 1970s. And it's got 1 million times the surface area of Earth, but it's a lot thinner, so you're not actually using up 1 million motes to do it. You are, however, still cannibalizing dozens of solar systems to build something like that. And, of course, you use some super strong material to do it.
Yeah, and even in some of the cases where you talk about some of the things that are like super high energy things, like I'm trying to think of, I think I think you did a video anyway, where you wrapped around the possible real stretchy ways of doing like faster than light travel, and one of them was like some of them are like, oh yeah, you just need enough energy that you need a piece of antimatter the size of Venus, and then you're good.
Sure.
It's like,
yeah, there'll be both wormholes and the Alcubierre warp drive, the two that are normally maybe kind of sort of permitted under Einsteinian general relativity. Both require, and it's the thing that gets left out and say, well, next year we're going to have ourselves a warp drive. It's like, the energy needed to run one of these, even if they were allowed under that math, is so much that when you arrive there to slow down, you blow up the solar system.
Yeah.
And they're really not likely to be viable technologies under that, but what they mostly require is something called negative matter. And we've never found a single drop of that, even though there were a lot of articles recently, pop sci ones, where they said that we had. We, in fact, found something that behaved just a little bit like it in a completely mundane way.
Yeah, well, wasn't it? There's something that was it. Those particles that you need, like underground tanks of water that are gigantic.
Sorry, neutrinos, yeah. Neutrinos, they thought for a little while they might travel just a hail faster than light, but that managed to fix that. It was a GPS failure, if I recall. It was that close, and it was just a little bit above, and then they realized it was just a little bit under afterwards. So. And it would have been, I mean, had that been the case, it would have been a big deal because neutrinos have mass. And the big thing is that nothing with mass should be able to travel at the speed of light, let alone over it. To go over it, you have to have something called imaginary mass or negative mass. It works out pretty much the same in the math. And it's one of those things we say it's not likely to, it works on paper, it works on the equations, but that's it. There's no evidence to back it up. And it does leave us in a bit of a lonely place because you think about it historically, you don't really have empires that can stay together if they've got a year's communication time between them. From border to border, somebody writes an urgent message and it takes months. That's about as big as an empire can realistically get and stay stable. You can't even do that to the nearest solar system if you're constrained by light speed. So vast, sprawling galactic empires don't really seem to be in the cards under that kind of normal context of communication time.
Oh yeah, there's a lot to talk in that. So okay, the first thing that I'm getting a lot of requests to ask about is what's your accent? I know I detect a bit of something from the south of the Mason-Dixie line, maybe, but
it's I call it hodgepodge. There's a bit of a speech impediment that's developed a bit of an accent around it. According to my speech pathologist, it's a Clevelander accent, which is apparently quite a bizarre one from an immigration standpoint. It's very strange compared to the Midwestern ones. But yeah, there's a little bit of Southern in there from my time in the Army, and probably some Brit UK RP in there from watching too much BBC, but it's mostly just a speech impediment.
Okay. So I do have a couple questions to get started, and then we can probably build up as we move along. I asked on the where that community tab is supposed to be for. I asked if anybody had any questions. I got a couple, and one is about, I think, probably the superstructure that is the most possible, and that is the idea of, well, they use the word Dyson sphere, but I mean that's not possible, I don't think. But Dyson Swarm.
Mm-hmm. Now, Dyson Swarm is the original concept. What it was proposed is the idea is if you want to tap all of the energy that a sun puts out, you have to build something around it, which is spherical in shape. The idea had been a big fog of satellites, but that got turned into a big shell. And technically that is possible, but if you actually build that shell, you'd have to use something we call active support, which is kind of like what keeps a piece of paper floating over an air vent. Which means you need a huge source of energy to keep the thing from falling on itself. But you do have the sun right there, so you do have a huge source of energy. The problem is that if you build that as a big shell, there's still no gravity on the inside of it. You just fall right into the sun. So you have to spin the thing, and that means at best you're going to have no gravity at your poles and very high gravity at your equator. So it's possible, but I don't know why you'd ever want to build one when you could build a Dyson Swarm instead, which is a lot more useful. And I think we talked about that one time before, is Dyson Swarms themselves really should not be thought of as a megastructure so much as it's like saying that a city is a megastructure, or a building, rather. There's just so many different things inside one that are all independent that you really don't want to think of it as one collective object any more than a city is.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember what the question was.
I didn't get it all the way through, but it's about... So this apply, like, so this is by commenter Baron J. Fellington Esquire, who has an amazing name, but also is the person who gave me the nickname, or gave me the name for this Quick Step series. So I wanted to thank him for that. But it's kind of also just a question about moving to Kardashev 1 civilization. I know we're going to be using a lot of new jargon for people who don't follow futurist and sciencey talk, but Kardashev 1 is where basically a civilization that has fully mastered all of the energy that the planet that they live on has coming to it or inside of it.
Loosely speaking, it's a scale that he's actually still alive. I can't remember his first name at the moment. Kardashev is a Russian physicist who said when we're trying to find alien civilizations, we should look for them by their energy usage. And he made a scale of planetary level, star level, which is a Dyson sphere, and galaxy level, which is an entire galaxy of Dyson spheres. Kardashev 1, we usually say we're not quite there yet, but it's kind of arbitrary how you would measure that. The idea is that you would use all of your planet's incoming energy, which is about 200 petawatts or 200,000 terawatts, and which is a lot of energy.
Mm-hmm.
But you could argue that our crops, for instance, use all that, or even you think about historically, we've not used most of the actual land that was populated. They had to leave it over for waste to be used for foraging or cutting wood down. So even when you're going over an area it looks like it's uninhabited, it's still being used. So where you actually stick that marker as Kardashev 1 is very iffy. You can make the argument that we already are one, but we usually put ourselves at about a 0.8, very logarithmic scale.
Sweet. Yeah. So the question has to do with so solar power and like using more and more of the star's output is basically the long-term thing. And the question has to do with what does that mean for the solar-powered life on Earth? And is there a point when we're going to have to make to ask whether we want plants or energy?
Most likely, well, this is actually kind of the tricky thing. Is sometimes people say, well, if you're harvesting all the energy of the sun, could you actually send that back to Earth? Wouldn't you burn the place up? And the answer is absolutely. If you add more energy to our planet, it's going to heat up. You can add it in discrete frequencies that will not heat us up as much, so that we can use better. But if you're looking for more power from solar, space is absolutely your best way of going about that. Now, it's very expensive putting anything up in space, so it's not. But if we had the same infrastructure in space that we do on Earth, we would easily be able to do power collectors and just zip the stuff down to us by microwave. And then you don't have to decide which one you want to do. You can keep growing plants on the planet and just beam down the electricity.
Yeah, this is the thing that I think it seems like it might be a issue for a civilization, but once you're a civilization that is harnessing the entire power of a star, I think it's something that's like pretty answerable. Because like stuff like a kind of similar question that I might have posed is, if the Dyson Swarm becomes something that we depend on for energy and we start building it up more and more and more, could there be a problem of like a global cooling effect? The fact that more solar energy is being obscured. But then that's, if we're having that issue, we're also harnessing energy at such a scale that we could figure it out if we wanted to.
The Earth eats up about 1/2 billionth of the sun's output. So you can always leave that spot open in the shell, as it were. Or just have these satellites, which are probably very long and thin, just torn when they're in between Earth and the sun to make sure the light comes through. But there are all sorts of little technical problems with a Dyson sphere. The funny thing about them is, though, that once you have one, or even part of one, you can do almost anything you want to just by sheer brute force. So we were saying, I think it was, if you were trying to bury all the people in a Kardashev 2 civilization that died each day, you would end up covering the entire planet over with fresh bodies every hour, just from normal attrition rates of a civilization that size.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously most of the people in a Dyson Swarm do not live anywhere near Earth. They're just out around the place in rotating habitats.
Yeah. And I mean, some of these, like, not to mention things like a lot of those like Dyson Swarm units could be habitats. You know, you have solar pallet collector on one side and society on the other, and then all of a sudden you have more space. The only thing is that at that point you'd have to start like literally harvesting planets worth of material to build the things. But that's you know, you're at that level.
If you take apart something like Mercury, which no one could live on at all, but would only have about the area of Eurasia to you, if you could colonize it, you can turn that into an effective living area, because the Earth is thousands of kilometers deep, right? But we only use maybe 100 meters of that tops, right? If you just do 10 or 100 meters deep inside one of these habitats, you get, tens of thousands of times the living area that you would just by colonizing a planet.
Mm-hmm. All right. The next question I have here that comes from Jay Luiker. It has to do with a book called Planetary, which I guess we can skip if you haven't read that book.
I have not read that book.
Okay. Well, then I guess I haven't read it either. So I guess.
Does it say who the author is?
The author is Tony Daniel.
Sorry.
Yeah, all right. It's all right. Apparently, it's a book that takes place in a K2 civilization, which would be interesting, but we'll go on from there.
Check that out. There are so few that actually do that. So
yeah. All right. The next question I got is from a viewer named Ace, who's a very regular contributor. He's a big fan of the channel. He wants to know what your thoughts are as a physicist and as someone who talks about futurist topics on strings.
String theory?
Yeah.
I am officially neutral on string theory because while it's a very solid theory mathematically and would explain a lot of things, the current evidence supporting string theory could be contained inside a thimbleful of glass and still have room for a shot. There's just not a lot of evidence to support it yet. We might be able to find some, but no one's really proposed an experiment that can check it. And, the further away you get from evidence-based stuff, while you do want to, if you don't have the evidence, you do want to speculate. That is what got a lot of those guys into trouble from Aristotle on through the 1700s. They just used raw logic and guesswork to get their way there without checking the evidence and testing theories. And string theory, I don't want to accuse any of the people working on it of doing that, but because they know that they're off on the very edge of what they can do. It might turn out to be the case, but there's no evidence for it yet, and I try not to take it as ironclad until we have at least some evidence.
Mm-hmm. So I'll just give a quick wrap up for everybody because, like I said, we're throwing out a lot of terms that I realize we're not explaining. So string theory is a branch of physics, of theoretical physics, of super hyper weird theoretical physics, and it comes from the work, the late work of Albert Einstein. Because what happened is in the early 20th century, we thought we had physics figured out. We had the whole Newtonian model, and we had all these great things about how things work. But then we found out that everything acts super weird when it's really small, and nothing is inherently predictable. And so what happened was that Einstein, kind of in his last couple years, when he wasn't worrying about nuclear devastation, which is what I know Einstein for, his last years were basically about trying to create world peace because he thought that the world would end if he didn't. And he wanted to branch something, and he died partway through this kind of thing. But it's kind of developed into this whole attempt to make the quantum stuff and the macro stuff make sense together. And I don't know. I know there's a lot of very Byzantine math involved, but I do know that at least
she's become the most famous mathematician, Emily Noethel, to help him out on that. Just because as good a mathematician as he was, this really required the very top, and that was her. Quantum was, we think of Einstein for relativity, obviously, but he had a lot of different discoveries, everything from why rivers are S-shaped to Brownian motion that he made. And his involvement in quantum was a very big deal. And that's actually shook up the landscape for my field more than relativity did. Just because
he was a bit of a grognard when it came to quantum stuff when it was first happening. He was this is bullshit type guy for a minute.
It's funny is we talk about dark energy these days. He always called his worst blunder that cosmological constant, which is essentially something we resurrected with dark energy as to explain things. So he said it was a horrible mistake, and that was just fudge factor, and now we've got it right back again. He did a lot of work, and he was involved in almost everything, but he wasn't right every time, obviously. There was so much work that had to be done that it was at least 30 or 40 years after that before we really had a decent understanding of quantum. And even now it's tricky.
Yeah. I've been told that I work at a university, and I've been told that once you get into third year physics, they start busting it out, and it starts it's here's your entire textbook you were taught so far. We're now going to burn it, and we're going to start over. But one of the things that we could talk about with it is that I think that the very dumb basic version of it would be that the universe is made of strings that are vibrating in like up to, I think they came to a compromise of 11 dimensions.
There's a bunch of different theories, including something called M theory and brains, and there's a lot on that, and I have to admit I'm not as familiar with it as I should be, because until there's evidence for it, I don't really like to get too sucked into it, same as with supersymmetry. The idea is that beneath the quark scale, you still have to solve something else, and that would be down at the Planck scale. The Planck scale is basically, if you think of an atom as small, and the atomic nucleus of one is even smaller, the Planck scale is so small compared to the subatomic scale and things like quarks that it's basically like if the atom were the entire universe, a Planck scale object would be a baseball inside that universe. So it's a huge jump down in size. And the notion with strings is that you can have them be open or closed, and that they are the basic fundamental building block that we make matter out of, things such as both quarks and things like electrons or neutrinos, which is best related.
I only know everything I know about string theory comes from the like pop science work of Michio Kaku. So, I'm pretty limited because he's a string theory physicist who's also a radio show host, and I'm not sure where he stands in the science community, but
well, I'm probably gonna get some file back for having said string theory is maybe not so solid of a theory yet, but I mean that's a personal attitude I take on this. I'm very proper on these things until there's solid evidence to support it and it's testable. I don't consider it to be not science. I just don't think it's something that should be out there in the public field a lot. Until a theory's reached the point where you can say, as like as not, this is probably true, we have some way of testing it. I tend to think it should be in the realm of white papers, not popular science journals.
Okay. All right. The next question I got is from Vincent Lorty, whatever. Oh,
hi, Vincent.
Vincent Lorty. I didn't put a space because the first word was with. So it was Vincent Lorty. So with current technology levels, is there enough material on Earth to build a full-scale planetary power grid?
Is there enough material to make a planetary power grid?
Yeah, that's the question. I mean,
yes, there's definitely. I mean, there already is a pretty big one. You might mean a superconducting power grid, or might have been talking about making a Dyson sphere or power collector swarm. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of metals on the planet. It's actually the majority of the mass is iron and oxygen, and there's actually a lot of oxygen in superconductors too. But by and large, it really shouldn't ever be a shortage on making a power grid, I would think, with the available metals. Maybe with something really rare like gold or platinum, you might have issues laying down an entire grid that way.
Now I know there's like some proposed changes to our grid that's going on right now. Oh, I think I'm bleeding through something. Something changed.
It's like you sound fine to me.
All right. So there's some like weird, funky stuff that people are talking about with like updating the power grid to be something that makes more sense, and that's going to require some pretty big batteries. Yeah, lots of money, but also big batteries. And I know batteries require some funky materials to make work.
There's so many different ways of storing power. Obviously, a traditional chemical battery, there's nothing too rare about the components. But you can store it as heat, like molten salts. You can store it as kinetic energy. You could have little flywheels spinning around a vacuum, hovering over superconductors. We have a problem that we do not have very good batteries yet, and even these modern new ones are so much better than what we grew up with the old double A's you get at Radio Shack, and yet they still don't store as much energy per kilogram or amount as gasoline does, for instance. And to like make something like electric cars truly competitive, you need to have something that can store fuel almost or better than, in terms of density, what a hydrocarbon can. At the same time, if you really want to be using solar in any place that doesn't have really great weather for it, you do need to have some way to store that energy. And it doesn't have to be a traditional battery. There's a lot of approaches to storing energy. And I'm trying to remember there was something new with batteries that recently got done, but I can't think of it.
Elon Musk got a contract to redo a big chunk of the Australian.
Oh, I heard about that. Yeah. I don't remember the specifics, but it was a very expensive and very large battery.
Yeah, but I know that those batteries, the ones that he's talking about, have things like cobalt and lithium that only come from rare earth minerals and it's kind of weird stuff that really can only be found in like a few places.
They are the rare earths, for instance, actually aren't all that rare. The thing that makes them rare and only come from China is that because Australia's got some great sources for them itself, is that mining them tends to be an ecological disaster. So it's almost no way to get them out of the ground that we've been able to come with so far at a decent price. So if you don't mind spending the money to do cleanup, but as long as there are countries that don't mind the ecological damage, then they can sell them at much lower prices. But the rare earths themselves aren't particularly rare, as it were. And now I'm not sure how a cobalt lithium battery would work. Obviously, lithium has a lot of role in it, but
I think I just lumped it. I think cobalt is needed for like screens, right? Cobalt's needed for something. There's something that is in our high-tech gadgets that needs a lot of cobalt, and it's why the Chinese have like done all those like contracts with the Congo.
I'm afraid I just don't know. Not a chemist.
Yeah.
Cobalt is certainly. I always think of cobalt as cobalt-60, which is highly radioactive. But we used to work with a lot when I was a student. And it was a component of dirty bombs. They'd suggested using as cobalt bombs, although I don't know if that ever really got much development until it just appeared in the Planet of the Apes sequel.
Oh man,
you dirty apes!
Dirty bombs are actually kind of creepy to me, but that's a different thing because like those are terrifying in little ways. So a YouTuber named or a viewer named Blargazar. This is like a super easy question because I think you already answered it earlier, but we can do it again because we were just starting out, and that is Isaac a YouTuber? Could he describe his channel? Which is weird because your channel is like 7 times larger than mine. So please.
YouTube is a huge place with, there are channels out there that I think probably have more views per minute than you and I both get combined. So it's very easy. I'm surprised some of the channels I run across sometimes that are just huge in size. Science and Futurism with Isaac Arthur, SFIA, we're a channel that focuses on science and futurism, preferably with a focus on a couple centuries at least ahead. We don't like to look at the stuff that's coming out tomorrow that much. Basically, beyond the immediate horizon. We try to keep all the science as hard as possible, but we try to see how far away can this go and look at it from like a realism approach to science fiction and the far future.
Mm-hmm. I think one of my favorite things, I think I commented on it with one of your videos, was that it sometimes, I think a few videos now have featured the Starship CN Tower. Where I think you use the CN Tower as like a spaceship.
There's a photograph of the CN Tower that I will sometimes use as a spaceship in some of the older videos. One of the problems, of course, is that we do not have the big budget film things that a lot of other, obviously places like any Hollywood studio would have. But we do have some really good graphic designers who've been helping us out in recent years and haven't had to use the CN Tower spaceship in a while. But it looks a lot like a spaceship. So I had a couple of places where I panned around it as an example.
Well, I live in a condo in downtown Toronto, and when I go up to
where you're at.
when I go to the 24th floor to work out in the morning, because sometimes for a while I was doing your channel's podcast rather than the channel's videos, and I was listening to some of this stuff, and I was remembering this thing, and I'm like looking at the CN Tower while doing this, and it was funny.
Oh, it looks like a spaceship. It's a very high-tech, futuristic-looking place. So, but the CN Tower spaceship.
All right, Saturnian Blue has a question that I think I could. I'll do their question, but I'll also spin it to something that I think would be a cool question. And I think you raised it in a video, but I'd love to hear more on it. And that is, what do you think will be the motivations for space colonization? On top of that, one thing I've talked about with my wife about Mars, when we talked about all of Elon Musk's plans for Mars, and that is, what are we going to do with it? Like, once it's not like, just like comment first on it, but like, how do you turn a dry rust ball into something that has an economy?
That's a lot trickier than, we can always push it under the rug, but the best place to do economics and almost any expansion is Earth. It makes more sense to colonize Antarctica than Mars or Venus right now. However, once you're set up there, and this is the other tricky part of this is, right now we always think of colonizing with our best and our brightest, our top guys, the guys who got the right stuff. Traditionally, you don't really colonize with people like that because you need millions of people to call it a colony, otherwise just a base. And the people you're most likely to colonize with aren't even usually average Joe. They're usually people you want to get rid of. Asteroids have a very powerful economic input potential. The moon does, because it lets you build up your orbital infrastructure around Earth.
There's some
Mars,
crazy hydrogen on the moon too, right? That everyone wants.
The helium-3 is the thing people talk about. That's a type of aneutronic fusion. Yeah, there was water ice on the moon that we would definitely like to get our hands on, because then we don't have to import it. And you can turn that into fuel. You can turn aluminum into fuel. You can turn almost anything that's chemically reactive into fuel if you want to. And the problem we have is that Mars, while it's the place we obviously go colonizing first, is actually one of the worst places in the solar system to try to colonize.
Yeah, it doesn't have a lot. I mean, I think it sounds like, from the way you're talking about it, it would be more profitable to colonize Phobos and what's the other potato moon it has?
Phobos and Deimos. They would be the place where you probably see most of the big bases starting up at, because then you don't have to go down the gravity well. You always want to have a space station, and they're a great place to do that. If it turns out that they have water ice, and we think they might, but we're not sure yet, that really helps trips to Mars, because you can refine fuel from water ice. So you send that first wave to Phobos or Deimos to make fuel for the trip down to Mars and up from Mars and back home. And that saves you often to make it strictly down on Mars with the ice there, in which case you're losing a lot to go up and down originally. But I mean, Mars is definitely colonizable, and to a degree it's terraformable, and we do spend a lot of time talking about how to do that. But this is one of those things you cannot think about colonizing planets in a really economic sense, because they're not by any modern standards. Mm-hmm. You do it because you want to do it. There's no tobacco plantations to be found on Mars. There's no sugar, no rum factories to be had. No.
But if we find out that FTL requires oxidized iron, we are good.
Oh yeah. Except we've actually got more iron than Mars does. This is the problem we have with Earth, is that pretty much everything that we want in the solar system, except for hydrogen and helium, the most common elements in the universe, we got more of it on Earth than any of the other planets do. The exception to this kind of is rare metals like platinum and gold, because they're not that common in our own crust, whereas they're decently common in asteroids, and you can take an asteroid completely apart. Right now we can't really mine our own core. So in terms of things you would ever ship home to Earth, only really rare metals, and there are things besides gold and platinum, some that are actually worth more that you'd find out there. Those are the things you'd ever bring home. The real thing you mine these things for is to build stuff in space. And that's what the point where you were looking for, why would you build in space? And it becomes a catch-22. If we build this, we can fund that. And say, but we can't do that yet until we build this. And why do you do all these things in space? And it is one of those things where you're looking about making a closed economy up there that Earth really doesn't have that much to do with. We would send out information, though. That would be our major coin. We have a very heavy gravity well, so we don't really want to ship stuff up. And the only things we're interested in bringing in are precious metals or very rare elements. So the other thing we can export, though, that gravity wells don't make a difference about, is information and entertainment. And Earth will probably be that our major coin for a long time. That, and of course, people, because we got plenty of them. Mm-hmm. And that's what you export for the early interplanetary economy. We did do an episode looking at how to build it up, and we actually suggested one for Mars, Venus, and Titan, Saturn's moon Titan, how they could do a closed loop with asteroids to form a basic economy. But in the end, it's doable, but I can't see people leaping at it. Whereas with asteroid mining, you could actually bring home several thousand tons of gold from a place like that.
There's people working on that right now.
Yeah, and it is actually, if you found a bunch of bricks sitting on the moon of gold, you'd say it's expensive to go up there, but it is actually cheaper than than the gold is worth. Going to the moon to fetch gold that's already sitting there is cheaper than the trip itself in terms of the gold's value.
See, now I want the sci-fi story that is about when those giant shipments of gold get flung into the ocean, people like scrambling to go and get them before the people who are trying to go get it find, and it'd be fun. But yeah, I think
you could definitely see some going off course and people trying to claim various salvage rights on it. That landed on coastal waters, that 20 tons of precious gold. I could actually imagine
you do that long enough.
That, yeah.
You do that long enough. Gold's value for being shiny and pretty and non-corrosive can only go so far. And I can imagine that could cause a situation in which be very destabilizing for our very gold-focused economy to have gold just all of a sudden like flood the market with gold, and all of a sudden gold's like everywhere and super cheap.
That's the concern a lot of people have, is because they'll say this asteroid contains, like 1 million tons of platinum. And it's like, well, yeah, that's contains several trillion tons of matter. Your average mountain here on Earth contains quite a lot of these materials too. You're not going to get them out overnight, and you're not going to ship home more than whatever it's going to cost. If it costs you $20,000 a ton to get the stuff, you're not going to drop gold prices beneath that, because it wouldn't benefit you to do so. So I'm not really all that worried about a precious metal flood from asteroid mining, but it could drop prices a lot. And then I could see someone intentionally crashing the market by saying they'll bring 100 tons of gold or 100,000 tons of gold, and then buying up all the available gold when it dropped beneath their cost.
Yes, the De Beers solution. If you just have one company own all of the gold in space and they just dole it out slowly, then
that's a good approach.
Okay. Yeah, I also have heard stuff about Mars. I guess like this would work for like the moon bases on Mars, that being like the kind of way station to the outer solar system. That it's like the last stop before the asteroid belt, and that's where like the real money is.
The asteroid belt is probably the place where the most money in the near future of space would be found. Yeah. In the end, anything that's got mass, it all depends on what your source is.
And if my watching of like 2 episodes of that sci-fi show, I can't remember the name of it anymore.
The Expanse?
What was that? Oh god, The Expanse. Yeah. So if my experience watching 2 episodes of The Expanse is correct, then Mars is a very good like springboard to like, Jupiter and Saturn and them. But even then, that's like.
It has its uses. It's easier to get to the asteroid belt from Mars than it is to get there from Earth. But if you're on Earth, you don't go to Mars to get the asteroid belt. You just go straight to the asteroid belt.
Okay, let's see. There's so many more questions. I want to get moving. So, what year do you think we will finish building colonies on Mars? I mean, that's a strange question, but like,
finish building a colony on Mars. I don't know that you ever really. I mean, is there? I mean, when would you see the United States stop being a colony in terms of it being a separate country? I mean, other than 1776, of course, or 83, I suppose that actually.
There's a date. There's actually a date for this. They did it, and it was it's 1892, because that was the 1892 was the year where the American U.S. Census showed that there was no part of the United States that had a average population per square mile of less than 1, which meant that there was no more quote unquote frontier left.
I'm not sure quite what the actual surface territory per mile of Mars is. Maybe 50 million square miles, probably a little bit more than that. So presumably when you start getting about 100 million people on Mars, we'll stop being a colony by that reasoning, I suppose. And I would not expect that to happen anytime in the next few centuries.
I don't imagine Mars has the resources to maintain a population that large.
Well, I mean, you could certainly maintain a population that large there if you've got just building up. You'd be all under domes, and but you get very good outputs from greenhouses and domes even under that kind of weak sunlight. So they could support that population. I'm not too sure why. I mean, it'd take a long time to build up to that. There's people there; they'll grow in number, I would assume.
Does Mars have like all those like little weird things or those little things that that humans need for living, that plants need for living, that aren't like all like I'm thinking of things like nitrites in the soil, and
it's very low on nitrogen. We didn't know if it had any at all. I mean, we knew it had at least some, but we have found some nitrogen deposits in some of the basins, and that was actually a really important find, because it means that you could potentially start up plant cycle there without having to import the stuff from Titan or Venus, which was actually kind of the basis for our early interplanetary economy, was that you'd be bringing nitrogen from Titan or Venus. But there's not a lot there, and it actually takes a lot. Humans don't need nitrogen to breathe, but we do need them for our plants. So if you want to have any sort of setup there, you're all going to need a lot of nitrogen for the air and soil, especially the air, because that's where plants get most of their mass from. What Mars is lacking, there's nothing it doesn't have any of, but it's got precious little water. It obviously has very little air, and you have to make all of it. And it's pretty low on nitrogen. If you put those in there, Mars does actually have enough gravity to hold an atmosphere over a decently long period of time. You wouldn't want to try to check back on one a billion years later and expect it to be intact, but so long as you're replenishing it, and it wouldn't take a lot to do that, you could keep an atmosphere on Mars that people could walk around in.
I mean, the long-term solution is you got to get the core going again. And I saw a movie in which Earth was having that problem, and they solved it. It was. So all you need is an indestructible drill thing and a very big bomb, and then you do it.
Don't forget discount Carl Sagan in that movie.
Yeah, I did I think you did a video about it, and I didn't even think about how to jumpstart a core, and then it was like, no, you just build the biggest magnet ever, and then you do it that way, and it's like, oh, cool.
I mean, people do talk about restoring the core in Mars, and of course, it's possible. If you're willing to throw enough force at things, it's always possible. But it's a lot easier just to build a big magnet around the planet, an electromagnet, presumably a solar-powered one. And most atmosphere loss is due to a lack of a magnetosphere. So if you build an artificial one, just a ring of satellites or whatever, then you have that problem contained. And it's a lot easier to build a magnet around a planet than to drill 1,000 miles down and set off a lot of nukes. You wouldn't want to be on the planetary surface when you're doing that either. So.
Yeah. That's true. All right. I have a couple, and these are just my own things, and these are two apocalypses that I don't understand very well, and I would like to know how likely they are and what they stand on with physics. So one I've heard about is the strange matter apocalypse.
Right. We have a type of quark called a strange quark, a very creative name because physicists are bad at naming things. The strange quark is one of the 6 types of quarks. The 2 that almost everything is made out of are up and down quarks. There's something called a strangelet. When it hits other normal matter, they think there's a chance it might turn it into more strange matter. So the idea would be that if you had a piece of strange quark material hit the sun or the earth, it might slowly turn the entire thing into those strange quarks. I'm not too sure how solid the science on that is, but it was considered a possibility for a while. I don't know how updates have gone with that since.
The other one I don't know much about, but it's another thing that terrifies me because I'm a strange human being, is something about a zero energy state, and that if this happens, the entire universe could just disappear.
We think of the vacuum as being a vacuum full of nothing at all, but it's actually got tons of stuff in it normally. And even when you remove every last particle from it, there's still what we call virtual particles and quantum foam in there. Little things popping into existence for a moment, then popping right back out again. And how much of these there are is a bit of a problem because one of our theories says it should be this much, and some of our evidence says it should be this much, and the amount separating them is 100 orders of magnitude. It's slightly off at that point. But the idea is that if the universe exists at a certain level of energy state, a minimum everywhere, that if that's not actually full vacuum, that there's another energy level below that, we could fall in some spot to that true lowest energy state. And the result of that would actually be an expanding wave of things falling into that lowest energy state that would travel out at the speed of light and destroy the entire universe.
Well,
and we wouldn't know about it until it got to us, though, so we wouldn't have to worry about it too much.
How likely is that?
No idea. Again, it could actually be something that happens all the time to every universe like ours. At some point, this occurs, and then you never see it coming till the wave reaches you and you're gone. This could actually be something that happens so often that there are multiple ones going on in the universe, all headed towards each other like raindrops on a pond. But it could be something that never happens at all. And that's one of those things where we don't know nearly as much about quantum and vacuum energy as we would like to. So,
all right. So then, what would you think would be the most likely cosmic apocalypse?
Probably that.
Probably that.
Probably that. Either that, or of course you got the big rip option, and you've got just the heat death itself. You wait around long enough. A lot's going to depend on what we learn about dark energy in the next 20, 30 years as our measurements get more refined. It's right now, it appears that it's accelerating, that's building up the expansion of the universe, not just constant, but speeding up at the rate it's doing that. If that turns out to be something that just keeps doing that, then the whole universe gets ripped apart after some billions or trillions of years. They usually say 20, but that's just when they set the one figure to an exact value, they picked at random. But not so much at random when they picked 1.5. That round number they calculate off of gives us 20 billion years. There's no evading that if that happens, but we'll know in the next century probably if something like that's going to happen, except that we don't know where the energy for dark energy comes from. And it could be a limited supply that eventually stops entirely. You might have expansion just stop out of nowhere because it runs out of energy. We don't know where it comes from, so we can't say it's going to keep coming in at a fixed rate and always has been doing so. We'll learn more about it. It was actually, we were just starting to get a good idea about it when I was in grad school, and we made a lot of progress in the last 20 years. But, we still don't know nearly as much as we'd like to about that. And then, of course, you just have the normal heat death of the universe, which is a long ways off, but is pretty apocalyptic. So.
Yeah. What's the over-under on things like black hole going, or rogue planet going through our solar system and screwing up, throwing up, like billiard balling us out of the solar system, or...
the odds of a black hole just going through our solar system, and they do move. They get ejected a lot of times from the place where they're made at. And so they will pass through space, which is pretty empty, but on your way out of a galaxy, you're likely to pass within some solar system at some point. The odds of it happening to us are pretty small, but that's a lot of mass. In of itself, a black hole is actually less of a threat than a star just coming by. The problem is that you can see a star coming a long way off, whereas the black hole, they're small. Most of them are the size of a city, and they all black, so it's hard to see them.
They are, by definition, hard to see.
They are very hard to see. You can pick them up they will have a glow around them from matter that they're accelerating near them, but we'd be lucky if we spotted one of those before it even got into the outer solar system. And at that point, you're modestly screwed. But, if one passes anywhere near the inner solar system, the effect is going to be utterly catastrophic. The statistical odds that happen are worse than hitting the lottery, but they're not zero either.
Well, also, once we invent the red matter, then you can do the same thing.
Oh my, funny even Star Trek thing. I never was entirely clear on what red matter did besides eat planets.
It somehow made singularities, but they never explained how. I got a question from ItGam asking about if you did a video about the next stage of human evolution. And I think you've done quite a few on transhuman type topics.
I've done a lot on transhumanism, but I don't think I've ever phrased it as evolution, just because to me, any definition of evolution that isn't random odds isn't evolution. You broaden the term too much and it encompasses too much. It starts losing its meaning. I don't think you see much evolution going on in species that reach a certain level of technology. Arguably, it's pretty suppressed even inside hunter-gatherer civilizations that have just gotten themselves a decent amount of technology. What the next step is for us, I think inside this century, we're almost all going to have implants. Nobody's going to have a cell phone anymore because it'll be in your head. I mean, some people might resist and keep their phone, but things like virtual reality goggles or your wristwatch, those will go away in favor of minor augmentations and implants. And then it's just a question is how far people want to go with that. And I'd imagine you'd have a lot of people who won't be happy with any, will be happy with a little bit, or will just be happy to go in for all of it. But that's not evolution. That's literally intelligent design.
So. I'm currently every Thursday night I'm playing in like this RPG that's cyberpunk RPG.
Shadowrun or
it's called The Sprawl. I think it's new.
William Gilbertson probably.
But the thing I'm doing in it is the character is a cybernetics junkie, and based on, do you know Left Anonym? The transhuman. So she's a transhumanist, person. She's like an activist, a person who does. But her whole thing is that cybernetics is like a thing that we could be doing now, and it isn't exactly even high tech. And so she's like this very hands-on DIY cybernetic stuff where she like actually implants her own implants and like says that she's got a significant amount of like glue gun glue inside of her and stuff like that. And she's like,
this comes up sometimes. I'm not going to tell people they can't put an LED light or a data stick inside their body. But I'm just going to say surgery is something that you should really only ever have done by somebody who's got a medical degree from like a real university, and it really should never be done for elective reasons, or at least, I mean, I shouldn't say you shouldn't ever do it for elective reasons, but I don't want to be the first to try something like that out, or even the first 1,000 or so. You could just look at some of the stuff we've done, like breast implants. The early series of those did not go over well, and yet at the time, everybody thought they were quite safe. Things can develop.
She's been in the hospital several times for like infections and things like that. Like one of the things she did is she installed neodymium magnets under her fingertips, so that she could like feel electromagnetic fields.
Mm-hmm. You could have
but I think one of those
has got magnets in it.
Yeah. Either way, the character I made was based on her because it's like in the cyberpunk future, she'd be very DIY. Cybernetics would be a big deal, and I thought about a whole thing about like jailbreaking and like removing DRM on cybernetics and stuff. That would be pretty fun.
No, I think I mean again that's one of the fun things about cyberpunk, which is cyberpunk, steampunk. There's another one I can't remember what it's called. Another punk something that's been catching up.
There's diesel punk. Diesel punk is like World War I technology.
That actually sounds more interesting even than steampunk does. But I mean, they're interesting. I mean, for steampunk, it's kind of a nice alternative history approach to things. Cyberpunk is Blade Runner plus William Gibson Sprawled series, or Snow Crash by Stephenson, and it's a great genre. But I always think of those things from the 80s talking about in the year 2020, and it's like I think Blade Runner took place in 18 or 19. It's like, well, things didn't quite work out that way. I mean, it's interesting to see how these things will go on, but you will definitely have a phase where implants are reasonably safe, but still make a lot of people nervous and might be illegal even. So you would have to go to some underground clinic to get them done. It would just be interesting how that progresses. We always respond to new technology in some crazy way, sometimes good crazy, but a lot of times not so good crazy.
Mm-hmm. I always think that cyberpunk, the thing behind it is basically when the worst of emerging technology and capitalism collide, and that's basically what usually you end up with is cyberpunk.
Yeah, usually. It's a very interesting genre. You get so many different flavors on side of it, but it's always dystopian and dark. You never get cheerful, and it's actually, I think in science fiction you very rarely get stuff set 20 to 40 years ahead of time that isn't dystopian. Very rarely cheerful things going on 20 to 40 years from now in sci-fi.
Actually, for some reason, I decided to go on a nostalgia binge, and I bought Final Fantasy VII yesterday and played that again. And I didn't forgot about how like it's super cyberpunk, and I didn't even realize that.
I had gotten it on PC in a 4-disc set, and I had 2 CD2s and not a CD3, so I never finished that game. Last Final Fantasy game I ever played, too. I've not caught up with any of the rest of them just because of that. So
that was a fun.
You think about I don't remember which one it was in the official one, but the Final Fantasy 3 that was for Super Nintendo anyway. That was very steampunk, I suppose. In that case, they used that a lot. Even in the first one, had a lot of steampunk elements to it. I was a very big fan of Final Fantasy on Nintendo and Dragon Warrior or Dragon Quest. Love those games. So many bad thumb moments from playing Nintendo as a kid.
I will say the port to PC. You know how Final Fantasy VII's got a lot of those little mini games.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not like the commands are not well ported for those things. Anyways, before we lose all the viewers, Sir Zhao Zhao asks about Sir Zhao Zhao's a regular of the streams. Could any of Tesla's later projects like wireless energy or laser weapons be effective?
Well,
I'd love to get your tech on Tesla and Elon Musk in general on top of that.
I am of the opinion that Tesla was a brilliant scientist who has become the center of an almost cult-like worship in recent years. Many of his ideas from that era never really went off too well because they were not very functional. But the wireless power one actually is. We were very early on with that, but of course you can get a wireless charger for your phone. I'd take mine out because it wasn't really designed for it and kept draining my battery. But when we try to get that up to range, I can easily see devices inside houses being wireless power. Not your vacuum cleaner or your stove per se, but all those things we have that's, just take a few watts draw. How much easier will it be when, well, I was thinking, my mouse right now, it has no cord on it, right? How much easier it will be when these things that require relatively low power supplies don't have to be plugged into something. You have to swap the batteries out. Maybe every couple of years you have to replace the battery because it's burned out. But I can definitely see wireless energy coming in more of a factor there. And of course, we've been developing that for years. And it's still not quite there yet. At the moment, it's at the point where you can stick it on a wireless charger, so you have to mess around with that mini USB cable, but that's about the only advantage to it at the practical commercial level at the moment. Check back in even 5 years, and we might be seeing a big run on decently moderate wattage used appliances being just wirelessly charged. You have your house Wi-Fi power source right next to it.
And you said something, I've heard about this stuff before, about people transferring electricity with microwaves.
Right, yeah. Same as you can do a laser, you can do a maser, which is a microwave instead of light. Microwaves have the advantage that they will go through a lot of things that normally light would not do, and they're pretty easy to generate and to receive with, as well as to contain. The biggest problem one always has when thinking about something like beaming power wirelessly with microwaves from orbit is we do have a term for a directed energy source that is very powerful, carrying hundreds of thousands of watts, and that's a death ray. So, microwaves are not interactive with some things, react very well with other things. They react very well with anything that's got water in it. So you want to be very careful with your microwave power stations, because you could just wreak havoc beaming one of those across the place.
Yeah. I do remember hearing about, like, how like radio works, like, you vibrate like a quartz crystal or something like that. Like, is there any way that you could use that for wireless power?
Radio is not the best way to transmit power. I mean, microwaves are actually the little border area between the infrared spectrum and the radio spectrum. It's very tiny, just like visual light. You can transfer power with any frequency of radiation. It's just that some, interact very heavily with matter that you wouldn't want to use them. Others are a little bit harder to generate. You think about how long it took us to get blue LEDs instead of just red ones, for instance. But yeah, you can definitely transfer power that way. You have to have a receiver. And if you don't have a receiver, it has to be directed, which, that's one of your approaches is, imagine you had a car going down the road that had a little solar panel on the back that could handle a lot of wattage, and there's just towers along the way that fix a laser to you and keep that laser on you the whole time, powering you. And of course, light moves so fast relative to a car that it could easily stay on you, tracking you the whole time. That's one way to do wireless power, where you just beam it directly at something as a directed energy. The other approach is omnidirectional, and that is a lot harder to do with certain types of radiation, obviously, because you really don't want to omnidirectionally transfer light. That's what a light bulb does, and if you got that turned up enough that you're powering something off it, it's either going to be blinding or wasting almost all of its energy.
Mm-hmm. Also, just while we're on the word Tesla, I do have to ask, like, do you have thoughts on Mr. Elon Musk, an individual who gets a lot of science attention?
He's such a weird. I mean, I like him personally quite a lot, but then I'm kind of into. I think of him as a bit of a ringmaster in the same way Thomas Edison and Tesla, for that matter, both were. And of course that's kind of my job too, so I can't really complain at somebody for doing the bit of the ringmaster circus thing with it. Elon Musk seems to be one of those guys that people either just love completely or hate and despise, and I do not understand why. To me, he's a clever fellow who's done some good development in R&D for us, or at least he had companies that did, and he's really inspired a lot of people to think about some of these things. So to me, that's a very good positive thing. Is he ambitious? Yeah, but shouldn't you be? He seems to be somebody people either worship or despise, and I don't quite get either one. To me, he's a really good guy who I'd like to see succeed with a lot of his ideas because they're fun. They're great ideas.
Well said. All right. I actually got, I think, the second ever super chat ever in the history of this channel for the question. So I feel like I should bump that one up. It's from the Terror of Death, which is a fun name to go with. So apparently this guy's a huge fan of your channel and was wondering if you had an opinion on Isaac Asimov, especially the concept of psychohistory, and if it could actually work.
We actually have a video on it. It's literally titled Psychohistory. There is definitely potential to use a more mathematical approach towards sociology and psychology. In fact, I think it would be hard for these fields to go much further without doing that. the ability to predict things thousands of years in advance, even with a population sample as big as a galactic empire, I don't see that ever happening. But your ability to use it to tell things like, I hate to say something like a marketing campaign, how effective it will be, or how well people will handle certain types of events like a hurricane, I think that there is definitely room for a much more mathematical approach to sociology there. And so I think we will have psychohistory in the future. It just won't be, as good as Harry Seldon's, 1,000-year plan or 1,500-year plan, I think was the actual amount.
Yeah. It'll be more like predicting the weather.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, it's like traffic patterns. You can predict traffic patterns, but somebody can always get up in the middle of normal traffic and, throw a cement block out the back of their car into somebody's window and change the entire traffic for everybody going to the city that day. You can predict those things statistically, but the overall impact, you get this butterfly effect that just keeps feeding on to things. And you'll never be able to predict those things to such an accuracy that you can predict, centuries in advance. But you could predict a lot of things probably even a year out, and then you're constantly fixing it, refining it. Every time it goes a little bit off the rails, you readjust. Again, just mathematical sociology, really, but possible, just not to the degree that's shown in that book.
Alrighty. Well, thank you, The Terror of Death. Holy crap. Okay. That was the $5 question, literally. All right, I've got another question from Ace, and it's a question about... All right. This is a fun one, because I know that this is another thing that drives science people bananas. And that is on the question of cold fusion and whether or not it's even possible. And the question is whether it's possible in the next 2 centuries.
The stuff like this, I tend to think you either figure it out in the next 20 or 30 years, or you're probably never going to figure it out at all. Cold fusion is possible. It goes on all the time. It's actually very important for a lot of our end of the universe cosmology theories because while it goes on all the time, it goes on at such a slow and improbable rate that you might stare at a sample for thousands of years before you see it happen. But when you're dealing with billions of years, you know that obviously get a lot more occasions of people winning the lottery, as it were. Is cold fusion in the lab possible? If it is, nobody's come with it yet. I don't even know what the mechanism for that would be, and everybody who suggests that has always been strangely cagey with that secret. Understandably, it's worth a ton of money, but if you want to keep something like that secret, you get it patented, you should be a trillionaire about a year later or so. They can keep it as secret as they want, and you check back a year later, and they're still scrounging for money, and you know that they didn't have it. It's a technology that if we could ever actually make it work would be great. Now, that can be confused with something like compact fusion, which is where instead of some giant tokamak or atomic bomb, you have something that's the size of a generator or car engine that actually does, kilowatts of power output. Something like that would be a massive game changer, even more than at the electrical scale, because now you have engines and cars that are powerful enough to pull themselves out of the own atmosphere and gravity well, and you can have personalized spaceships. Microfusion, where you might have it inside a small appliance, would be another option. But I really don't see those happening, and I think where your fusion concerned, it's probably always going to be a very big technology and very hot.
I think my best memory of cold fusion, I don't really know a ton about it. I just know it's one of those things that was like
anybody does.
It was like it was like something in like the 80s that everyone thought we were going to be having like any day now. But obviously I learned things a different way than other people. I get my science information. So like I remember cold fusion because of a little entertainment product called StarCraft, in which they made a cold fusion bomb, in which the case that they used to carry it, they also had their beer cooling in it. It was a pretty fun thing. Either way, okay, I'm ruining everything. I think they just wanted the joke cold fusion and then having their like nuclear bomb in a cooler surrounded by beers.
So it made me think of the film Broken Arrow. They had Nicolas Cage and Travolta in it, and they were constantly had people shooting around the bomb. Say, please don't shoot the atomic weapon.
This one, I'm not sure where to go with it, but Andy Lord wants to know when we should go to space. And
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. We have. What do you like? If nothing else got invented, what do you think that like what do you think space travel wise we could be doing right now if it wasn't for money and logistics and it was just about what we have the capacity to do with the technology we have today?
That's always a little bit tricky because when one says only the technology we have now, you kind of have to legitimately give over the R&D for some of this stuff too. Like, we've never built a mass driver that can launch a spaceship into space. The technology's there, but you still have to do some R&D on it. No new science to find, just the practical engineering. The easiest pathway forward, if you're stuck with modern technology and you have a virtually unlimited budget, would be a combination of a mass driver, which is basically a very long hyperloop, actually, very long evacuated giant gun, and you shoot people out of it. It's like the old Vuong gun from the old Jules Verne Man on the Moon ones. Only it's much, much longer because you can't shoot people out of a cannon that's only 20 feet long, or you'll get pancake on the other end. And then you combine that with something called a skyhook on the other side. And a skyhook is, in most cases, a spinning long tether that you snatch onto, and it throws you up into space. That is probably the one with no more new science or really new technological developments besides a prototyping phase for that. That would be the way I'd probably go about it. Obviously, we can push that a little bit further ahead. It's something we call an orbital ring. It's the big daddy of getting to space cheaply. But that does require a decent amount more work because they're either giant energy hogs or require superconductors with genuine magnetic shielding, which is always tricky.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that is one of the big technological barriers to space right now, I could be wrong, which is that at the moment you can only go in space for so long. Like, you get an amount of time that you're allowed in space, because when you're in space, the amount of radiation you're exposed to is way higher than the baseline. And so in order for you to prevent getting basically cancer, they give you a budget for how much time you can spend in space. And I think it's getting longer, but I think that's the big...
Longer. The biggest thing is you can block radiation to be perfectly safe in space. You just need to use a lot of mass to do it. And we have probably lots of mass into space. If you start building big, you can take advantage of the square cube law to have much thicker shielding on stuff proportionally. And we actually have an episode talking about that on March 15th. February 15th, spaceports. February 8th. And radiation damage to people's bodies obviously can be curtailed if you got more shielding between you and the really deadly depths of space. The other problem, of course, is gravity and the lack thereof. And you have to take care of that through rotation, but you have to build big there too, because people don't really handle being spun around in circles as well as we would like. So if you're not doing it at a very large scale, you'll get that gravity fine enough, same as you would inside a washing machine when it's in the spin cycle, but you'll be nauseous as hell. Build it bigger and you won't notice. And that's basically the thing, is to really be safe in space from radiation and gravity concerns, you have to build big. And we can do it. It's not like it's all that technologically challenging. It's getting all that mass up there. It's expensive. And
it's getting that profitable by next quarter.
Yeah, and the problem is, and this is something people forget, there's not a lot of things to do in space to make money at the moment. Once you're in space, you have an infrastructure, you can trade with all the other people who are there. But at the moment, it's satellites and science. That's what space is good for. That's why asteroid mining is so appealing. Satellites, we only need so many of them, and for the most part, we just send them up. Nobody has to go up there and deploy them. And there's only so much science we can do up there without having to go big too. When we find that one snowball point that suddenly makes it possible to do other things in space besides science, research, and satellites, that's when we'll see the kick over, and we can start having these gigantic constructs in space that will protect people from a lack of gravity and surplus of radiation.
Okay. That's and there's actually something a little bit on that. It's the next question. The next question I got here actually is about what do you think is the value of zero gravity manufacturing?
There's a lot of things you can do when you don't have gravity. I think one of the examples I always use is ball bearings. You want a perfect sphere when you're making a ball bearing, and that's a lot easier to do when there's no gravity or when there's microgravity. And there are a lot of examples of things we could build better if we didn't have gravity on. There's a lot of chemistry you could do differently if you don't have gravity in the way. But that is...
I think on top of that, isn't there something weird some form of welding that happens that you can only do in a vacuum, like where you can like literally touch metal and it'll fuse in a weird way?
There are no liquids in space, and in a vacuum. You can touch two things together in space and they'll weld together if it's done correctly. It's a little bit trickier than that, but which is good because welding in space is quite a nightmare. I almost killed the Soyuz 6 crew. One of the early Soyuz missions, they tried some welding and almost killed them. To weld in space, you usually end up using lasers, which is easier to do up there too. But there are certain things that come into play when there's no air. Like inside an environment there, you can't touch metal inside the space station to do this because there's air. It's not the lack of gravity, it's the lack of air. But the lack of gravity gets in the way for welding too, and a lot of other chemical processes. Things don't work the way we intuitively expect them to, and we have to adapt around that. But there are definitely some manufacturing options available when you don't have gravity going on, including really big structures that are not the mega structures we live on, because those would have gravity on them, but things that could be, thousands of kilometers across, and basically as sturdy as tissue paper structurally, just because there's no gravity working on them, just a little bit of tidal effect from the sun. And there are a lot of things you can do, like telescopes. Hubble is a big telescope, but it's small compared to some of the ones we have ground side. There are telescopes you can build up in space that are potentially thousands of kilometers across, and you could never do that on a planet. You didn't have the atmosphere in the way. There are things you can do on Mercury, on the moon, for instance. Some telescopes you can do in that environment where you just spin a little dish around it, naturally forms a parabolic mirror from the combination of gravity and spin that makes for a perfect reflector for a lens. And so there was definitely a lot of very impressive astronomy you could do once you're more into space.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, you could just like take a selfie of those planets rather than look at their wobbles.
Yeah, that's something people forget. All of our wonderful photos from space are taken from about 90 miles up. You can't see the stuff on the moon from here with a big telescope because it's a quarter of a million miles away. Hubble can see billions of light years away, but it can only see things the size of a galaxy. So you start building these bigger telescopes, you might actually be able to start spotting planets directly, imaging them directly, as opposed to trying to detect them by their wobble when they block light.
Yeah, that'll be like the Super Kepler. The other question, so we actually talked about this. We kind of had a pre-show on Friday, or pre-thing where we hung out. And there's a question about do you think aliens exist in our galaxy? And before you give your answer, I'm going to give my less informed answer and see, just so that I can't pretend that I was right later. And my answer is, I don't think so. At least not intelligent aliens. I don't think that the numbers are going to bear out, even if there's so many stars.
All right. Well, I would say my answer would be, I don't think so. At least not intelligent ones. So pretty much same answer there. If there are civilizations hanging around our galaxy, they either have to that are all technology and older than us, or higher technology and older than us. What are they doing right now in the meantime? And we can say things like, well, they don't use radio waves, so we wouldn't even know they were there. But that's something SETI keeps saying over and over again. That people think that we look for aliens by radio waves. That's not the way you find them. It's like trying to pick up New York City by detecting their cell phone transmissions. You detect them by all the little things that make a city hard to hide. And say, can you hide a civilization? Conceivably, but who hides a civilization? When does that happen? Typically speaking, you don't hide a city. You advertise its presence every way you can. And there are so many different ways. Think about, how would you go about hiding New York City? As an analogy for it. And we can talk about various ways you might cloak a civilization, but realistically, how do you hide a civilization and still have it functioning? And unless there's a good reason to do so, then why is a civilization going to go through all those hoops to do that when it doesn't benefit them in any way? And there really is, these are always things. How would you hide them from us? Right? They're not interested in hiding from us. They're interested in hiding from somebody who's got more technology than they have, who could wipe them out. So that's your motivation for hiding, unless you're scratching something called the zoo hypothesis, which is where they keep us in some cage. In which case, we can't even assume the galaxy we're looking at is really the real image, because instead of trying to tune your entire galactic civilization to be invisible, you just wrap that civilization you're trying to make a zoo around in some fake environment. So, I mean, every time we try to look at any Fermi paradox solution that has civilizations hanging around in the galaxy actively, there's always these flaws that pop up that just make it very implausible that anyone would do it, let alone everyone. And when you just look at that option, it just starts telling you, yeah, maybe there are alien civilizations out there, but it just doesn't seem like it's very likely. So life might be very common, and indeed I tend to think that we're going to find life all over the place, maybe in our own solar system, besides on Earth. But intelligent life is probably going to turn out to be an evolutionary path that doesn't get followed nearly as often as we'd expect it to.
Which means we get to be the what were those aliens in Star Trek that were their hand wave for why everybody looked like a person with prosthetics on?
I can't remember what they're called. The ones from the chase with the DNA they encoded into everybody. So many things wrong with that episode. I don't remember what that race is called. Probably precursors or something like that.
We get to be the precursors.
Precursors, or the Cthulhuian older ones.
Yeah. All right. So this is from a user, which this is their actual name. Joseph Stalin wants 1,000 subs.
It's interesting.
And the question is about, can mankind survive on space stations?
Yes. Yeah. It's all about how you build that space station, of course. Person could not survive indefinitely on the ISS, probably. Beyond the fact they'd have to have food and air sent up to them. The bigger ones we look at, like an O'Neill cylinder, which is a giant rotating can you could cram a city into, and a big one, too. There you have a much more contained environment. You have artificial gravity from the spin. You've got light coming in. You've got space to grow food. You can recycle your water and air that way. You've got abundant energy available in space from solar, or if you don't have something like nuclear powering you. And in that context, yes, you can. But we're not there.
Could they survive without extensive imports?
Probably. Obviously, initially they got to bring a lot in, but let me temper that with anybody who remembers in the 90s, we had was it the 90s or the late 80s? Biosphere 2. If you remember Biosphere 2 at all.
I have vague memories, yes. I was very young in the 90s.
Yeah. A lot of people get locked up, or not a lot, like 6 people, I think it was, get locked up in a big dome for a while, and they had to live for like a year, and they were cheating and bringing in chalk. I'd have cheated too if I was in that environment.
I seem to think that Wayne's World did something about it.
A lot of people did a joke on it. I think there was even a Pauly Shore movie that was a parody of it. Pauly Shore. I haven't done a Pauly Shore in years. I haven't missed it either. Now I can hear him making those jokes in my head. Oh God, I hated that guy. Nothing against the actor personally. I just.
Well, on the Fermi paradox answers, I did want to ask the question about the big simulation theory that we're like in some grad students' physics simulation.
Simulation hypothesis is slightly different. I mean, as a basic concept, it's very similar to all the old "is this a dream" type things that we saw going on with everything back to like Plato's cave. The difference is that simulation theory, simulation argument, goes by the notion that we can actually see some potential evidence that this is going on. That's where it differs. And the notion is straightforward. This. We know that it's very likely that the technology is possible to simulate an environment and to simulate a human mind on a computer, as was the brain in a vat thing. So that being the case, you really only have 3 scenarios. One, nobody ever develops this technology because it's impossible and gets wiped out first. 2, everybody develops this technology, but they choose not to use it for some reason or not to use it much. Or 3, people develop the ability to make simulations of whole planets or people, and they do it all the time. Since we don't know what the odds on those are, we have something called the principle of indifference that says just make each 1/3 of a chance. And if that's the case, then 1/3 of the realities out there have the ability to simulate entire universes and planets repeatedly. If that's the case, then the odds that you happen to be living in the real world rather than one of those countless simulations is very tiny. So you'd effectively have a 33.33 chance of being in one based on what we know right now. So,
I will say there's a kind of Swiss cheese. There's like a Swiss cheese question in that, because as someone who's done like a computer within a computer, there's limits on that.
There are. It's not the idea that you'd be a simulation of a simulation of a simulation of a simulation. They did a wonderful episode of Rick and Morty with that, actually. It's the idea that the people at the top simulating might do thousands of them. Now, you can do simulations inside a simulation, but they should each get progressively more simplistic. But we don't know that we're not any more simplistic model. If you're in that level, you don't know that it's different. So it's say computer is all the way up, total is all the way down. I don't think we're living in a simulation, but not because I don't think they're technologically possible. I'm quite confident they are. It's more that I don't think people do the ancestor simulation thing that much. There's so many ethical problems with doing that, and it'd be hard to do something like that covertly, because there was a pretty big power draw and equipment draw to doing an entire planet as a simulation. So if somebody decides it's unethical, it will be hard to do that without drawing attention and getting into trouble. And then the other side of that is, yes, people might want to simulate entire planets for entertainment, but they're simulating and they're simulating. You don't actually need full conscious minds to interact with for every person on a planet to go have a fun vacation on 20th century Earth. It's like if you're filming a show in a library, it doesn't matter if the books inside are all blank because the characters aren't going to open them up and show them around. So you don't bother simulating all the text, right? For entertainment purposes only, you really should not see simulations that have full sentient humans in them. And if you did, it would just be a couple of people interacting with the main character, i.e. the person visiting that reality. So I do not think simulation hypothesis is too likely because I don't see people doing that simulation too much. But it's internally impossible to disprove. You can never prove that you're not in a simulation. You can prove that you are.
Someone once called it atheist religion. Yeah, I mean, like the things that they go on, like the evidence that they do put forward is like math works too well, and things move kind of like pixels at the quantum level if you think about it.
Very much like that, actually. It's a little disturbing. However, I mean, and this is the big thing, is when you're saying that this was purpose-built, that means that pretty much every factor should be optimized, not just okay for, but optimized for whatever the purpose is. I would assume intelligent life. And, why would you simulate an entire universe when you can theoretically only get out to your own supercluster before all those galaxies are gone? Of course, you don't know that they actually are really simulating all those other galaxies. They might just be tiny little specks, and that's it. But they are always arguing to make about how reality looks very much like a simulation. But you have to approach that from the provable and testable approach of saying, if X is the case, it would show that a simulation is more likely. And then you have to test that. What most people are doing is taking every last piece of evidence and saying, this would be perfect for a simulation. You can just easily say this would not be. And so it's not really a good argument approach.
Mm-hmm. All right. I guess this next question, have you ever read anything called Bobiverse?
The author, Dennis Taylor, is actually a regular over on our Facebook page.
Okay. Someone wants to know what you think about the Bobiverse series.
I love those books. I'm actually really looking forward to. I'll say that after everyone's watching, we'll almost only do his next book as one of our books of the month whenever it's done getting through the publisher. He sent it in a couple weeks ago. One of my administrators on my Facebook page recommended it to me, the series. I fell in love with it overnight, and then I bumped into the author on my own forum, so it was a freaky coincidence. Those books are absolute geek fuel. If you're a Star Trek fan, or if you've just had a lot of science fiction in your background, you will read those and not be able to stop laughing the entire time. The topics covered in there are handled very scientifically. I think of them as a comedy along the lines of Douglas Adams, but the science in them is handled very well. I love that book series and would recommend it to everybody. Probably one of the best ones to come out in a couple of years.
Very nice. All right. Another question I got is from Blar Gazar, is about asking for sci-fi novel recommendations for fans of the planet Mars.
The usual one everyone would recommend would be Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars trilogy, Red Mars, Blue Mars, and Green Mars. I think Ben Bova's done some on that. Of course, you got the old Bradbury Martian Chronicles, and I actually just saw the movie and haven't read the book yet. I mean, literally just a couple weeks ago, watched The Martian by Andy Weir, and I wanted to make sure I watched the movie before I read the book, so I haven't read the book yet. So I can't recommend it, but everyone says it's great, and the movie was good, so I'm betting it probably is. I
feel bad for The Martian now, because like The Martian functioned on the assumption that there wasn't that, like right around the time The Martian the movie came out was when we found out that there's a whole bunch of these like toxic salts in the Martian soil that would make everything in the Martian not work.
Any science fiction that you read that's more than 10 or 20 years out of date, even if it was very scientific at the time, is going to have at least a couple of those in there. Now, it was very, I mean, again, I can't say for the book yet because I haven't seen it, but the movie was pretty well done. And I like that nobody died in it. I am not a big fan of action movies to begin with. And it's kind of nice to have one where everybody survives. It's a happy day. It would have been so easy to have killed a bunch of people off at random, and they didn't. And I appreciate that. But that was Matt Damon, I suppose. Pretty good actor. I didn't enjoy some of his early work because a lot of newer stuff's been pretty good.
All right.
Yeah.
Vincent Lordy wants to know if there's ever going to be some Isaac Arthur fiction.
I suppose the Hades game series would technically count since I'm writing all the lore for it, but that was interesting how that started off because that was a different game. I was writing for a franchise. I can't say which franchise it was, but I was looking forward to do the sequel. But that probably would be it. I mean, I am not good at characters and plot. I can do the world building in, so if I do any fiction, it's almost always going to be with a team of some sort that's handling that because I do very wooden dialogue.
Okay. Let's see. Where are we? We're making progress. Do you have any favorite strategy games? That's also from Blargazar.
That's almost the only ones I play. Well, no, I tend to like city world building games or grand strategy. I don't like to play chess. I played way too much chess as a kid. And generally, any of the board games that are best known as strategy games, they get a little bit boring after a while, like Risk or Victory or Action Allies. But I always like to try out new ones. I played StarCraft when that came out. I was fond of Warcraft, but I never got into the MMORPG. Yeah, I like strategy games. That's pretty much the extent of it. Almost anyone, if you got to think about it, it's fun. But I like board games better than online games because I like to be able to sit down with people with coffee or beer and just burn the afternoon away.
Yep. Stellaris is the new one that I'm kind of addicted to, which covers all.
I haven't played yet. Everyone says I should play it, and I believe it's true, but I've tried to play it a few times, and I couldn't get into the interface, and I got kind of bored, and then I went off and played more of Anno 1404, a very old game from 2006 that I'm obsessed with. So.
Yeah. Paradox games are basically designed so that like understanding the interface is like that's figuring out the game.
Yeah, and that is the truth. Well, I mean, I think Europa Universalis is one I was always quite fond of from them, and quite a few Paradox games actually. I like them, but not every one of their games always hits well with me because again, if you don't get that interface down, it can be a real pain to play.
Yeah, well, I think what they do well though is that the game Stellaris specifically takes like every single science fiction trope. Mm-hmm. And finds a way to fit it into the universe. So, like when you're playing the game, like any crazy science fiction thing can happen.
I have never heard anyone say a single bad word about Stellaris as a game, and I really should get off and play it. But I never seem to have a lot of free time anymore, so I'll tend to default to games I know really well because it's not necessarily very good games, but I'd say the three games I play the most are Sid Meier's Railroads, Anno 1404, and Candy Crush Soda Saga.
Oh my, the Terror of Death has super chatted again. Thoughts on the Homeworld game? I've never heard of the Homeworld game.
Homeworld is a fleet-based game. I actually haven't played that much, but we're using it as a basis for a lot of stuff that was going on for the Hades 9 game. Homeworld is a completely ship-based factory game that all takes place in space, and that's about as much as I actually know about it. I feel bad for not having more of an answer on that question. My friend John, who I went to school with, same department, was a huge fan of that, and he played all the time. I never got into it, though.
Yeah, I just heard about it right now. So,
oh, it's I want to say it's from 2001 or 2002, but it's a really good game graphically for that time. It's also three-dimensional, and that was quite a rarity at the time.
All right, to get away from games for a bit. This is a question for both of us. How do you think the world will end? Defined as humans wiped out, or at the very least, human civilization rendered very unpleasant compared to living standards previous.
I think because I actually have a big episode coming up that for mid-March called Dying Earth. So I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but I would say I would expect it to end about 1 quadrillion years from now, e.g. 1,000 trillion years from now, not 4 billion. As a gigantic tomb planet that's just layer after layer after layer of museums and junk and graves. So I'm gonna try to explain in that episode.
I see being at like kind of a fork I see like almost a like flip a coin between 200 years from now there being no humans, either because Earth is an irradiated wasteland or because the planet is like 80% carbon dioxide and we've like climate changed ourselves out of existence. But besides that,
so I tend to get known as an optimist, but I think it's really more that I tend to assume if we wipe ourselves out, then it's like funny. It's like game over at that point. Well, if you lost, you probably didn't deserve to win. I'm not interested in what our descendants might do if they kill themselves off, because if they're not able to survive, if they're not making a strong, to me, there's got to be more to a civilization than just existing. If they're not out there conquering the challenges presented to them, then they can go do their own thing. I'm indifferent to them at that point. And I think if they are out there conquering those challenges, they're going to keep surviving. And if they go down anyway, then they went out swinging, and that could be proud too. Every book has its ending, and how it ends is almost as important as how the book goes. So.
Yeah, if we can solve the problems of nuclear security and our energy crisis, I would probably say that the only answer to that question would probably be the 1 billion year. In about 1 billion years, the Earth is no longer going to be habitable unless we move it.
Unless we move it or shade it. You can shade it against a little bit of light. Same as we could do this with global warming, for instance. We just cut down the amount of radiation coming in by putting a lot of thin shades between us and the sun at the L1 Lagrange point. Which is maybe not the best approach for us for this particular crisis of climate change, but is certainly on the table for dealing with things 1 billion years down the road. A lot of time for R&D. But the sun gets a little bit brighter every year, and it's going to keep doing that until we say, the sun eventually goes red giant and then becomes a white dwarf. There's a lot more to that step, and these are things that go on for millions of years. And the sun will just keep getting bigger and hotter until it goes to what's called subgiant mode. Then it goes into red giant mode, and then that lasts for like 500 million years, and then you get a planetary nebula mode, and then white dwarf. And these are periods of time that are so long that you really can't think of them as short phases. These are, whole civilizations can rise and fall doing just one small step increment of these. But you can move a planet and you can shade a planet. And so I'm really not worried about natural disasters taking us out. If we make it through the next 50 years, I'll go that far. If we make it through the next 50 years, I think it will be pretty much immune to natural disasters. So
maybe gamma ray bursts.
Yeah, the biggest threat to intelligence, and probably the only way to really kill off intelligence and technological civilizations, is other intelligence and technological civilizations. Of course, that would include artificial intelligence, genetically augmented people like Khan, Noonien Singh, cyborgs, and aliens, which leaves a pretty big threat potential, actually.
Or, I would say that the energy crisis and nuclear security and the Earth not being completely repurposed to make paper clips. I think those are like the three things that are going to be like.
Yeah, you have to worry about the paperclip optimizer quite a lot. Which that could happen with an AI very easily, because an AI could be very like humans if it was raised by people and we were its major influence, or it could be so alien that it's more alien than actual aliens would be, because aliens at least would share evolutionary motivations with us. An AI might think that its only purpose is to, again, make the paper clips. And there's no, if that's its main motivation, there's no reasoning with it, because that is what it does. It could be smart, logical, chatty, friendly, and all that, and it's still going to make paper clips out of you in the end.
Yep. All right. I'm going to try to answer questions faster, because we're got about 25 minutes left, and there's still a lot of questions. So Post Android wants to know if there's any underrated channels you know of that are in the 5 to 10K range that you'd recommend. I don't think he's in this range, but you did do a collaboration with another channel that I really like, which is, I think his name's like Joseph Michael Gaudier or something like
John
that.
Michael Gaudier. John is a good friend. We actually met from a topic on the Fermi Paradox, and then we decided to collaborate, and we were both chain smokers who like cider over beer. And we have to do an episode again sometime, me and him. But John, I think he is bigger than 10K right now, so he wouldn't fit that criteria. He's been going quite well, and I'm very glad to see that. I think Astrofocus has been growing. They might be over it. Paul Sutter's over it. I can't think of any in the 5 to 10K range right now that I would recommend, but I don't memorize other people's subs rates that much. I half the time can't remember what mine is. So
yeah, it's a good answer. I could probably toss. I mean, I think that's coming up a lot these days because there's like people in with the partnership program change. There's a lot of people.
I've never actually got. They send me emails on it, but I've never actually gotten around to reading any of them. I like to collaborate with other science channels because if they're the same size as me, we can share audience and it's fun. If they're smaller than me, it's a good channel. Then you can help them grow, and that's you can never have too many science videos. You can never have too many scholastic videos. Period. We were talking about that the other day. Is there's not enough history channels either. Physics is actually probably overrepresented. There are quite a few science channels that are physics channels. You don't see a lot in chemistry or biology, sadly. Or Cody, obviously, Cody's lab, and he's certainly not at the 5 to 10K range. He's got 1.5 million. But he does geology and chemistry, and I think he might be the biggest channel for those. And that's saying a lot because there are a lot of science channels that got 10 to 15 million subs.
Chemistry is difficult because I imagine that doing good videos on that would cost money.
Well, it certainly can, yeah. And it's hard to film in a lot of those cases too. You can't do the webcam talking about it, and there's not a lot of animations. But I always think of Mr. Wizard. They say Carl Sagan, great guy. He's kind of what my channel is modeled off of, but I've just as much respect for Mr. Wizard, and there hasn't really anyone to try to replace him or to come back there. To a degree, Bill Nye, but not so much. And lots of people want to be the next Sagan. I wouldn't mind it myself, but not so many people want to emulate Mr. Wizard, and I think he had a much longer and bigger impact than even Sagan.
Part of my PhD application actually did have a bit about me saying that I wanted to be a history communicator for history in the way that I actually wrote, because I was being fancy, William Nye did for science, for the STEM sciences.
Mm-hmm. This is a major change we're seeing across the board in how we do education, and how we do education where you don't have to go and attend a class. You just learn at your own rate what interests you. And it's not the best way to develop skills for a profession, probably, but when you just want to learn about something, you could go to Wikipedia even 10 years ago. That was awesome. Go to Wikipedia and learn whatever you wanted. But reading the text is a lot different than seeing the hands-on or the discussed topics in a verbal or visual way. And it's a medium that's going to keep increasing in size until we come up with something even better like virtual reality, and then that will keep increasing in size. And I think we'll see that has a huge impact on people. If people forget, we always talk about how ignorant people are these days, but a lot more educated than they used to be, and that's only going to keep going up as we get to the point where we don't just have really good ways to access information, but we can tailor everything to the person individually. So like you have a computer that noticed that a student was not absorbing the material well because they were giving eye movements that indicated boredom, and it would change the material around so it was more interesting to them. And if you can tailor that one-on-one thing, what we do is essentially a lecture format, right? The big class format. Imagine if you can get it to the point where the computers are doing that one-on-one teaching, which is always the best. At that point, you see an explosion in what people know. And
I swear it's going to happen, because I even said that like the future of TV is that we're just going to have TV shows algorithmically made to entertain us personally.
And that's quite probable that you'd have, your virtual reality or TV environment that was, there wasn't episodes of a show in the classic sense, but rather the whole thing is constantly tailoring itself to each individual watcher. And, for something like that, you needed some pretty impressive computing, so we're not there yet, but we probably will be in this century.
Yeah. Terror of Death with a non-super chat question asked, which of the 3 versions of FTL travel currently seen in science fiction is possible currently, or is I'm gonna reword this to what I think he meant, which is like, of the sci-fi trope FTL systems, which of them seems the most plausible? I know that many of them aren't possible, but a few of them are possible but not plausible.
The 2 ones that I would say have the most, well, there are 3 approaches that I would say make some kind of sense. Your first is that you warp the space-time between 2 places, so you're not going faster than light. With a warp drive, you're not going faster than light. You seem to everybody else, but you're all just contracting space in front of you and expanding behind you. That one is on the table if you got negative matter or energy even. Ditto, wormholes are possibly on the table at that point too. I don't expect any of these to actually pan out though. The other one, though, is the idea that you could jump into some parallel universe where the physics were different. The speed of light is faster, or inertia works differently, or the place is just smaller but has
subspace.
Subspace, so hyperspace, I think, for Babylon 5, and you come back out of that at some other location. Those are the ways. I mean, there's a reason why these pop up in science fiction. Someone comes up with them as possible workarounds, and they get popular. But I don't expect a single one of these to ever work. Not now, not in a trillion years. But I wouldn't mind being wrong. So
yeah. I mean, okay. I'm trying to think of anything, but I don't have any physics background.
Yes.
So
I'm horrible at brief questions. I don't do both.
So someone's asking if you've seen Star Wars: The Last Jedi.
No, I've not yet seen it. I almost always wait to see movies. I made an exception for Blade Runner, but the new one, I almost always wait to throw it on DVD. I'm a smoker, and I like to drink a lot of coffee, so I don't like to sit through like 2.5 hour movies. I remember Peter Jackson films are always a torment for me. I never watch those except on DVD. You come back in, then you've missed 10 or 15 minutes of the movie. But I haven't seen Last Jedi yet. I have seen Rogue One and Force Awakens. I was underwhelmed, but not really. Force Awakens was okay. Rogue One was quite good, and I've heard mixed reviews of Last Jedi, but not too many, because I hate spoilers. So I will give an answer to that when it comes out on DVD.
I will say that The Last Jedi is one of those movies that is better the less you analyze it.
That's true for almost all Star Wars films.
If you just let it wash over you and don't read a single think piece about it afterwards, it's all right.
I mean, I grew up.
The more you think of
Wars, I love Star Wars, the originals. I really did not enjoy the prequels too much, but I didn't hate them either. I've seen Clone Wars. I've read probably 100 Star Wars EU novels, and I really liked the EU setting. So I knew they were going to have to scrap it, because you can't have your writers having to read every last one of those novels. But I do wish they'd incorporated more parts of that, and I do miss that. They said they're going to make it as Legends, but as soon as that happens, they're going to cut support to it and switch to the new stuff, right? So, but I keep my fingers crossed. Disney's done a great job with Marvel Comics. It's hard not to beat the prequels anyway, so hopefully all the new Star Wars films coming out will be good. Rogue One was good. Awakens was a little mediocre. I haven't seen Last Jedi yet, so I'm hoping it's good. And people say no, so
it's firmly all right.
Firmly all right.
I give it a B. I give it a B minus.
B minus. It's like with the Star Trek films when they came out, or Discovery now. I've only seen the first few episodes of Discovery, I think up to episode 5, and Star Trek always has bad first seasons except for the original series, so I'm waiting patiently for like season 3 to see if I'll still be a fan by then. But same for Star Wars. I'm going to go watch every last one of them, regardless of whether I enjoy them. So, we'll just hopefully they'll get better.
I think Discovery is good. It's just not a Star Trek show.
It's different, but I like to give them a lot of leeway. Deep Space Nine is one of my favorite shows by them, and it was a lot different too. But a lot of people said it wasn't real Star Trek at the time. And
Orville feels more like a Star Trek show.
I have seen all the Orville season 1 for that, and that is a good show. I actually didn't like the episode. I think the 3rd and 4th episode, I had to come back and watch that. I didn't watch these things the whole seasons. Orville, Seth MacFarlane's got an interesting sense of humor, and I've enjoyed the show. I'm not sure whether they're going to take it in season 2. I don't know how you do parodies. Normally, a parody, you can't do a long show on that, but Terry Pratchett's Discord shows that you can do a very long series of nothing but parody on a genre. So maybe Orville will be around for 5 seasons.
I think it started off as a parody, and it kind of stumbled out the door figuring out what it was. But once you got to like episode 4 or so,
it started like 5 or 6 picked up. Yeah, it picked up.
It decided that it's not going to be a Star Trek parody. It's just going to be its own show, and it just kind of.
And I think that's the right move. They're going to keep doing the jokes and humor angle, and it wouldn't be the show if they'd stop that. But it's trying to find its own footing, its own universe, rather than just be a parody. And in fact, Pratchett's Discord did that too. I try not to overanalyze them. I never bring my science hat to the table when I'm watching sci-fi. When I'm reading sci-fi, I do, but not when I'm watching it. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed that these, be improving shows rather than things we kind of lose, because there's not a lot of space opera sci-fi around anymore, and the Sci-Fi Channel doesn't seem to actually. It seems to be like a lot more Sharknado. I was hoping they'd do more miniseries like they did with Children of Dune.
Oh man, I really wish that Dune was a thing. Dune is my favorite science fiction series.
It's my second favorite one. Well, third, I suppose. I love Dune.
I have a question for a big fan of Dune, though. I have one question.
Hmm?
I have heard mixed results or mixed things about reading past Children of Dune.
I think God Emperor of Dune. Actually, I think I got it on the shelf there. God Emperor of Dune is probably the best of the later novels. I would always tell people either read book 1, read book 1, 2, and 3, read book 1, 2, 3, and 4, or read all the original series, or read them all, including the new ones by his son and Kevin J. Anderson. Which I'm not going to comment on the newer books. They have some quality points in them at times.
I've read about 2/3 of the Butlerian Jihad.
I was actually, if that had not been set in the Dune universe, it would be a pretty decent series. It's because it is in Dune that it doesn't seem as it doesn't really seem like Dune. Some of the books they've done were quite good. On the other hand, Heretics of Dune was okay, but Chapter House Dune was a pretty weak offering. And you can never, when the original author dies, no matter what they do, it's going to be not as good in people's eyes. We had that with Robert Jordan when Brandon Sanderson took over for him, and Sanderson is probably the best sci-fi fantasy writer out there right now, certainly on par with Jordan or GRM, George R. R. Martin. And yet it's somebody else's series. You can't do it as well as they were going to do it. Yeah. So I don't like to hold them to too much of a high standard. But Dune, great book. I liked all 6 of the originals quite a lot, but I would say Chapter House and Messiah are the weakest of the original 6.
Yeah, I definitely could see that about Messiah. All right, we've got another super chat from Terror of Death, who apparently is just addicted to our conversation. Wants to know if we're fans of any of the giant monster movies, like kaiju movies, these King Kong and Godzilla.
I grew up on Godzilla. I used to, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons, I would watch those with my mom and grandfather all the time. Any sci-fi that was available. There's something called the Big Chuck and Little John show that used to play them a lot at nights. Yeah, I like the Godzilla movies, but I can't say that I'm a huge fan of the kaiju in general. It just depends on which one. They've got a sort of nostalgia value for me, though, at least.
I think I was born in the wrong time for them. Like, I remember, like, for me, Godzilla there was 2 Godzilla movies that came out in my formative years. Mm-hmm. One was, I think, the 1998 movie that most people would say is the less said is the better.
It wasn't the worst one.
Yeah. Well, it is Godzilla movie, so it's not a high bar. The other one, I remembered it was, I think it was called Godzilla 2000, and it was like an evil alien kaiju shows up, and it had some stuff with, like, the one thing I remember very much is that they had, its theme song was by Rob Zombie, which I thought was like the weirdest mix of things ever.
What was that movie? Dawn of the Dead. I was thinking of the movie he was directing. Rob Zombie is.
They had. The theme of Godzilla 2000 was, I think it's called Super Freak by Rob Zombie. Like, it's just like the weirdest song to have it. It was a weird movie, but like nobody seems to remember it but me.
It was not a very good movie. Honestly, where Godzilla movies are concerned, if they're not in black and white, they're probably not good unless they got that old color look of like your Technicolor. If it doesn't look grainy and it doesn't look like there are wires attached to them, ironically, it's probably not a good Godzilla film.
Yep. I also remember the 2014 one with Bryan Cranston that I think I actually like went on like a 4.5 hour rant with my girlfriend, now my wife, about how much I hated that movie and how bad it was.
One of the advantages of waiting till the thing's on DVD to watch them most time is that I usually have a good idea where to set my expectations. There are quite a few movies that I've enjoyed a lot that other people thought were bad, and some of them objectively are awful. But we all have at least a few books or films or shows that we know objectively are just complete trash, but they're still, they're like comfort food. It's not healthy for you, but you still read it.
Mm-hmm. I got a question here from Harding D21, who says he's writing a novel trying to make a story about a breakthrough starshot where the probe that we sent found aliens in an alternate timeline where the space race never ended and Mars has a population of 40,000 and they sent us a message. But besides the pitch, just so it's like sounds like science fiction and alternate history. Any advice for writing science fiction? I guess like I should interpret it that way.
Where that's concerned, when it comes to writing science fiction, I would say the two most important things all the time when asking somebody who has never in fact published a sci-fi novel would be always do your research and don't be afraid of cliches. Tropes and cliches exist for a reason. Yes, there are a million stories out there where the young farmer turns out to be a prince and has a magic sword, but it's still good. That's why it's done so often. Do your research. If you can imagine if somebody was doing an alternate history thing where they had the pyramids set in Greece, that could be interesting. That maybe the Alexander had not died off and he decided to start building a pyramid my God, I forgot what the actual area is from, Macedonia. And so he goes and builds some pyramids. That would be an interesting alternate history. If, however, you think the guy who's writing it actually thinks the pyramids are in Macedonia in the real world, that is somebody you're going to throw that book in the garbage for. Sci-fi is usually not held to that same level of accuracy. You can get away with a lot more mistakes, but you shouldn't. You should always do your research on these things. Don't let real science plot, but do your research.
I would probably say that at some point, decide. Like there's kind of like a shit or get off the pot when it comes to science fiction, which is like either go like do your homework and do it well, or like embrace that you're not going to embrace the science and do like a full out Star Wars. But like trying to do
some of the best sci-fi has just crap science, and I'm fond of the Warhammer 40K setting, which is less scientific than Star Wars. It's still good sci-fi.
Yeah, Warhammer 40K is its own thing. I want to open that. We have like 8 minutes left, so I don't want to like open that can of worms. But Warhammer 40K, I have a complicated relationship with, especially because I don't like Nazis. Oh my. Okay. Terror of Death.
No good sides on that one.
There's a thing about Warhammer 40K, which is that it has a strange amount of fans who are actual Nazis.
Really?
There's like. Yeah, it's which is funny because it started off as a critique of fascism. But either way, the Terror of Death has another question. What is your opinion of Isaac Asimov's Foundation series and the other people who've written the books in the series?
Okay, I actually haven't read the Psychohistorical Crisis all the way through, the one that somebody did like 10 years ago. But if he means the ones by Bryn, Bayer, and Benford, I thought they were pretty okay. Actually better than Foundation Earth, which is a bit of a weak entry. I love the original trilogy. I think the Mule is one of the best villains in fiction, period. I thought Foundation's Edge was a nice follow-up on it years later. Foundation Earth, not so good. Prelude to Foundation, quite good. Forward to Foundation always makes me cry because it's the last book he wrote. And then the trilogy, the second Foundation trilogy, I thought Bryn's was the best one in there. It was the last one. Some parts of it didn't resonate with me too well. I did a reread or re-listen to them last year, and I didn't enjoy the first one as much. But I thought they were pretty good. Not super good, but you had three very veteran authors there who were also trying to do a tribute to Asimov, so I liked it quite a lot overall. I wouldn't mind seeing more in that series at some point.
Asimov is somebody I really need to dig down into, but I have ADHD, which makes it hard to read a lot of books.
Sci-fi novels from his era are a lot shorter, and you can give them all on audio. There's actually one of his is done by Leonard Nimoy as the narrator, which is quite good.
Oh yeah, just reading a lot in general is difficult for ADHD people. All right, so a question about the Ian M. Banks culture series. Would this be a somewhat accurate portrayal of humanity in the future, paying lesser civilizations to keep ourselves entertained?
I hope not. I mean, I'm a big fan of the culture series and of Banks, and I'm sad there won't be any more of those. But the culture itself, I mean, there are so many high concepts in there, and it's so much like Star Trek if it was just done a little bit better and further ahead in the future. But I do not like the idea of civilizations trying to go around enlightening other civilizations covertly. I think you either don't do it or you just go ahead and land and say, "Hi, we're aliens. This is the score," you know? I don't like the idea of manipulating people that way. It seems unethical, you know.
All right. David Reed says, Isaac, I see you recommend the Revelation Space series. Did you find it hard to get through at first?
Yeah, actually, yeah. I had the first book in it, Revelation Space, as it turns out. I actually had to start that through a couple of times. That was same for Wheel of Time too. A couple of my favorite series are ones I think I read the first 5 chapters of over and over again over the course of several years trying to get into it. But once I got used to it, got into it, it's my current favorite science fiction series. And the new book by him from that actually just came out after several years, and I literally just finished it last night, and it was quite good. So it is hard reading though. It takes a bit getting into. It's not like Gene Wolfe, Book of the New Sun, hard to read, but it takes a bit of getting into.
Awesome. And all right, Ian Lees wants to know if there's any possible, if we can't do FTL communicate or FTL travel, can we do FTL communication?
That one's a little bit more on the table, but not too much. People have been talking about quantum entanglement for this, and that's just all wrong in every respect. We did a video on that too. But there are problems with doing FTL travel because it always involves time travel. There are some slightly safer areas to do that with just communication, but even that, very unlikely. And then you have to make sure that you probably could only ever do that if the two things are really at the exact same speed relative to each other, i.e. 0. Otherwise, you would have problems with causality and time travel there too. So planets don't move at the same speed as each other in other solar systems, so it's unlikely.
Okay. And then, oh my, we're actually hitting the bottoms. This is getting it. Alternate Future Mapping Hub, that's a mouthful of a name. I have a question. In your opinion, Mr. Arthur, what is the best news channel so I can rely on?
The best news channel? Oh, jeez. I am a news junkie, but I grew up watching C-SPAN, and I still think of C-SPAN as a good one to go to if you actually want to find out what's going on. Minus a lot of commentary by people who aren't experts. I am not a fan of television news, and I mostly get mine through aggregators. Just look at the headlines and see what's going on. And I've not been up to date as nearly as much as I used to be on a lot of the local court issues. But I couldn't recommend. My advice to everyone is find someone who disagrees with you about everything that you actually can tolerate reading, and always make sure to read their articles so you're keeping your mind open to whatever else is going on that is not inside your own echo chamber. And then otherwise find people who you feel are honest and go into detail. And then, that's just, I couldn't recommend anybody.
All right. There's like one more question, but it's more of a noodly Marxism question for me. So I don't think it fits the stream. Either way, I think we've hit the end like just in time. So like,
here we go.
Is there anything that you have coming up in the near future that you want to put a lot of attention to?
I suppose from a historical angle, next week's episode is going to be an exploration of Mars, a 2-parter with Curious Droid, and he'll be looking at the history of some of the planned missions for Mars, and then I'll be looking at the ones that are planned for the next 20 years or have been, and we're just going to kind of see how realistic some of those were, and maybe whether or not any of them can work out that we have on the table now.
Awesome. So since it's been a long stream, Isaac Arthur, you are the host of Science and Futurism with Isaac Arthur, our SFIA.
SFIA.
It's an amazing channel, and you should really check it out. And I hope that there's a lot of great stuff to go through, and even some of your videos, you've done a bunch of shorter videos, but then you made longer versions of them. So there's a lot to go through. There's a lot of really good stuff. And if you don't want to watch it, it's a podcast as well. So that works. And to all of my viewers, thank you guys so much for being subscribed to me for January. January is probably the biggest month in my channel's history so far.
Congratulations.
Which is kind of hard to comprehend how crazy things have been. So thank you. And I'll be doing this in February. And of course, new video out tomorrow, etc., etc. Thank you so much, Isaac, for coming out.
Thanks for having me here.
Cheers.